So I've talked about a lot of trap metal artists on this channel before, from the biggest to the most influential to the most despicable. I mean, it's basically all I talk about anymore, but there's one artist that I've missed time and time again. Somebody who's almost as important to the genre as somebody like Syringe, XXXTentacion, or even Ski Mask the Slump God. And that artist's name is Kamiyada, the founder and creator of Midnight Society, which is still one of the biggest collectives in trap metal alongside Spider Gang and Members Only, but it's actually still active unlike the other two. And Kamiyada himself has been making music for about 10 years at this point, so I think it's high past time that somebody makes a video covering his career, his life, how he got to where he is now, how he can make it even bigger in the future, the fallouts, the beef, the collectives, and everything else that goes into the story of Kamiyada. Giovanni Duncan was born September 21st, 1995 in Maryland on an army base, and this is because his father was in the military during the time that he was growing up, meaning the family would often move between Washington D.C., Maryland, sometimes they'd be somewhere in the middle, sometimes they were in bad neighborhoods, and sometimes they were out in the mountains with nobody around. And this made it so he didn't have a whole lot of structure during his younger years. He would have to move from school to school, meaning he'd have to leave old friends behind, which wasn't that big of a deal because he was pretty good at meeting new friends, but at the same time, it's never easy for a kid to have to move so much during their younger years. And on top of that, him and his sister were the only two members of the family who weren't fluent in Spanish, so when they went to family get-togethers, they felt like the odd man out because they weren't able to communicate with everybody the way that they were able to communicate with each other. Which meant by the time that he got into school, he began to lash out, getting into fights with other kids, stealing money out of his teacher's purse, and just basic badass little kid stuff, nothing too out of the regular, but it would get him grounded time and time again. And during the time that he was grounded, he wasn't allowed to play video games, watch TV, go outside and ride his bike, and basically all he was actually allowed to do was listen to music. With his family being from Panama descent, they had an old box of cassette tapes that they kept in the family room, which included classic reggae acts like Bob Marley, Buju Banton, and Beanie Man. And he loved these cassette tapes so much that he would listen to them almost every day, actually singing every single word when he was listening to them, not realizing that the boombox he was using actually had a built-in microphone that was picking up his vocals and overlaying them on the cassette that he was listening to. He only realized what he had done when him and his dad were driving to work one day and they decided to pop the cassette tape in, realizing that his own vocals were playing out of it instead of the ones he was used to, with his dad making fun of him but also kind of hyping him up, but he was like 6 years old at the time so it didn't affect him too much. Later in life, Kamiyada would realize that he actually had undiagnosed ADHD, which is why it was so hard for him to pay attention in class, but also why he would hyperfixate on things like riding his bike, playing video games, but most importantly, music, with him wanting to be a reggae artist all the way from the time that he was 8 years old. However, his musical aspirations would change one day when he saw the light reflecting into his window, bouncing off of something that was in his front yard, and when he went outside to see what it was, he realized it was actually a Kanye West CD for College Dropout, and it was covered in sauce, scratched up, and looked like somebody had treated it really poorly, but he decided to take it in, clean it off, put it in the boombox, and see what it sounded like. And as soon as he popped it in, he instantly fell in love. He had never really heard music like this before. He had listened to a little bit of hip-hop with his friends in school, but nothing like this, so he decided to listen to it over and over again, eventually making it his bedtime routine to listen to the entire album as he fell asleep. And through Kanye West, he would discover Lil Wayne, listening to all of his music and trying to emulate him as best as he could, but by the time he got to high school, he discovered a whole new genre, being rock and 90s grunge, listening to bands like Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and Deftones. And he actually began to love these bands so much that he would emulate their clothing style, dressing like that when he went to school, getting his friends to notice that he was switching up and listening to what they considered white people music. But Kami didn't really care about that because he described himself as somebody who would hang out with the cool kids, the lame kids, the nerds, the jocks, and basically anyone in between. He was able to get along with everybody, but he wasn't really close to anyone. By the time that Kamiyada was in the 10th grade, he really wanted to switch his life up. He didn't want to get in trouble with his parents anymore, being locked in his room, and he realized that he was getting older, and if he kept going down this path, he might actually be in some real trouble with the law, so he decided to stop fighting, he stopped stealing. He definitely still wasn't the best student, with him not really paying attention in class and getting pretty bad grades, but he was at least trying to put his energy into a more positive place, focusing mostly on music, playing guitar in hopes of eventually getting into a band, but unfortunately with the total lack of interest in the genre in his area, he wasn't able to form one up, which honestly is probably for the best. He probably would have wasted a whole bunch of time working with a band that wouldn't have really wanted to put the same amount of effort into the music as he did, and he would have broken up with them eventually. I mean, look at Ghostmane, look at Lil Lotus, look at most of the rappers I talked about. They all started off in bands and eventually broke off because it just never works out. And on top of that, his guitar ended up breaking, so he decided to become a full-on hip-hop artist, starting with his boom bap style and going under the name Prophet, which is not that unique, but at the same time, it's pretty fitting for the style of music he was going for at the time. But even though his band didn't work out, he still really wanted to be part of a collective, being heavily inspired by Odd Future, not in a musical sense, but more for the fact that there were a bunch of kids in LA doing whatever they wanted, living life by their own terms, making music organically, and he really wanted that for him and his own friends. But just like most kids in high school, they had absolutely no drive whatsoever to make music. Whenever they would hang out, all they wanted to do was get high, drink, and do the basic stuff, so Kami was once again left on his own to make music without the help of anybody else. By the time that he got to grade 12, he was completely tired of school. He wasn't paying attention at all anymore, skipping classes most days and doing the bare minimum to make it by, and because of that, it looked like he wasn't even going to be able to graduate, so the school ended up putting him in a program where he would work a part-time job. And around the same time, he would get into an on-again, off-again relationship with a girl where basically they were together in everything but name, but apparently she didn't think so because she ended up posting a picture of her with another guy laid up in bed, and this was really Kamiyada's true villain origin story because he wanted to call her and tweak out and yell and get upset, but instead he decided it wasn't worth it and instead channeled all that anger and aggression back into his music, changing his name from Prophet to Kamiyada. Now there's no real deep dark backstory to why he decided to choose this name. It basically just came to his head when he was working one day, and then he typed it into Google to see if it had any meaning or if anybody else had the name already, and there wasn't really any results for Kamiyada, but Kami does mean God in Japanese. Yada apparently means knowledge in Hebrew, so it had some meaning behind it, but it definitely wasn't intentional. But even though the name had changed, the style was still pretty similar, with him dropping his first official mixtape on Bandcamp called Yada Yada, which really isn't anything all that special, but it did prove that Kami could put together a competent body of music when he really wanted to. But his first real introduction to the world of online rap and working with people over the internet is when he made his first SoundCloud account after he discovered the app through an Earl Sweatshirt fan page on Instagram that happened to share a link of a Spooky Black and Bobby Rap song. And after he listened to that song, he decided to make his own account so he could listen to more music from Spooky Black, discovering one song called If You Had a Zune I Hate You, which featured an artist known as Bones. And we all know at this point that Bones is basically the granddaddy of SoundCloud rap, so as soon as he heard one song from him, he started listening to more and more, eventually discovering Chris Travis, Xavier Wolf, and all the guys from Sesh Hollow Waterboys. And for the same reason that he loved Odd Future, he also loved Sesh Hollow Waterboys. He liked the idea that they were all friends and they had producers, videographers, people making merch, and they were doing it from the ground up. And they would really inspire Kamiyada to try to make his own rap collective. It seemed like a lost cause at this point because a lot of his friends had ended up moving away after high school. They weren't interested in making music anymore. But now that he was active on SoundCloud, there was no real reason to have to work with in real life people anymore because there was an endless supply of artists that were on the same level as him, made the same style of music, and he was eventually able to form up enough connections with people online to make his own rap collective known as Midnight Society. But before he did that, he met a producer known as The Virus and the Antidote, as well as another artist known as Dutchman who would help him work on his follow-up project to Yada Yada called Live from Space Volume 1. Not to be confused with the other project that's called Live from Space Volume 1, this was a different project that was posted on a now defunct website, and he ended up changing the name of it later on. It's kind of confusing to track this early music from any artist when they're posting on different websites under different names. They have collab tapes, they have kind of compilation albums, and nothing really makes a whole lot of sense. But yeah, this was basically his second album, and then after that he started working on more singles. And this is really when Midnight Society would start to form up, with the two founding members being Virus and Antidote and Kamiyada, but they would later go on to include Black Sand, Fuck It, Young Bambi, somebody named Young Bitch, which is a crazy rap name, as well as a whole bunch of other members that I can't include all in this video. And this group was named after the Nickelodeon show Are You Afraid of the Dark, which was basically a show about a bunch of kids sitting around a campfire and telling scary stories to each other, and the group in that show was named Midnight Society, and I guess that name stuck out to Kamiyada so much that he decided to call his own rap collective Midnight Society. It's kind of like City Morgue where the name doesn't mean anything, but it's become iconic at this point, so the origins don't really matter. After that, Virus and the Antidote's career really started to pick up steam when he produced a track for Bones called Rest in Peace, which featured a verse from Bones where he would scream in a trap metal style, inspiring Kamiyada to start making the same type of music, mixing both rock and rap together to make what he called trap metal. At this point in 2015, when Kami really started to make this style of music, there wasn't a whole lot of other people doing the same thing besides one artist known as XXXTentacion, which he actually ended up having a little bit of friction with. I mean, it wasn't really Kami and X that had beef, it was more Virus and the Antidote and X, because X would take one of his beats to create the track known as Gnarly Bastard, which ended up blowing up online, and then after that, Virus would give the very same beat to Chris Travis to make his own song called We Up. This really pissed X off because he felt like Gnarly Bastard was getting undercut by the Chris Travis song, but at the same time he never talked to Virus and Antidote about buying it or leasing it or anything else, so he really had no claim to the instrumental one way or another. But keep in mind this was 2015 and this was a very new genre of music, so nobody really knew about buying beats or how they were supposed to carry themselves online. They were just finding random beats and rapping over them because they never saw SoundCloud as something that would become a full-on career. So overall it wasn't that big of a deal, it was a pretty petty issue, but it turns out that X got pretty upset at another person who was in his rap collective known as Members Only named Fuck It. And this all happened because because Fuck It took a picture with Chris Travis of the two of them performing together on stage, and apparently X saw this as a big time betrayal because he thought Chris Travis was now his enemy, and then him and Fuck It started to have friction after that, and eventually in 2016 he would full on leave members only. During the time this was all going on, Kamiyada would drop his track Room 202, which he would then send to Virus and Antidote to remix and put on a new beat, with Virus redubbing this song as Tale of a Ghost, which went on to do numbers on SoundCloud before then picking up steam on YouTube when a bunch of people would make AMVs for it, and then after that, Kamiyada would start sending the song out to other producers to make their own version of and remix it into different styles. Which admittedly kind of pissed off Kami's fans because they were tired of getting the same vocals over and over again put on a new beat, but every time he would drop one of these remixes, they ended up doing numbers, so there was no real reason to stop. And it's also very important to note just how much AMVs played a part in the rise of Midnight Society, as well as how much influence they actually had in that scene, because most of the people who found out about them at the time was through AMVs, and they were really only doing it for Midnight Society members as well as X. They were like the two big trap metal acts at the time. And then after that, people started making AMVs for every artist, like Sinister, you got Cameron Nazi, so every time you watch an AMV, remember that Midnight Society was really the first group to make that style popular. Things get a little bit confusing here with Kamiyada putting the same songs on different albums as well as naming albums the same thing, but Static Depression seemed to be the next one that would come out and featured a couple songs that would blow up in the underground as well. Product of Drugs as well as Tales of a Space God went on to do numbers on SoundCloud, but it was his next two tracks that really started to blow up even bigger than Tales of a Ghost. You got the track Adrenaline that was remixed by Rare Akuma, changing the name of it to Raging Fist and blowing up on meme pages all over the internet. You also got Adult Swim, which I believe came out before this tape and it was doing numbers for a while. It appeared on both the first tape as well as this one, as well as Static Depression, so it seems like Kamiyada really liked this track and wanted to keep putting it on new projects so they would get more numbers. But the biggest of the three tracks was called Tokyo Ghoul Freestyle, which was dedicated to the anime of the same name, and because a lot of his fans had already come over from AMVs, they were definitely anime fans and they really ran the track up with the style and the fact that he was talking about stuff that they never heard a lot of rappers speak on. Not to mention the track got a lot of plays from people in Japan without Kamiyada's knowledge. He had no idea that his music was reaching out that far, but when he went there in 2019, he realized just how much passion people in Japan had for him and the rest of Midnight Society. He ended the year off by dropping another project called After Dark, as well as welcoming Fuck It to Midnight Society. Yeah, so it turns out that X and Fuck It completely fell out at this point and he would leave members only to join Midnight Society, but there is one track that a lot of people get confused about that people think Kamiyada was supposed to be on, but there's a little bit more to the story than that. This track is known as Sippin' Tea in Your Hood, which as you already know is a diss track aimed at Space Ghost Perp, and apparently Kamiyada was supposed to be on a remix of this song, but what actually happened is that X released a version of the song with an open verse, so it wasn't really an official remix, it was just posted on SoundCloud for any artist to take and hop on. Kamiyada ended up doing that, Fuck It, It's Okay to Cry, a whole bunch of different artists ended up jumping on, but it was never an official remix, and there is no official song between Kamiyada and XXXTentacion, which is highlighted even more by the fact that Kamiyada actually ended up dropping a diss track on X called To Kill a Wolf, and this track was placed on Kamiyada's next EP called To Kill a Space God, which was basically this experimental album with 5 acts where each song kind of builds off the last and then it ends off in a big bang. It's pretty cool and interesting, you should definitely listen to it if you haven't. And there's also a song on the project that features Fuck It, so you can see that Midnight Society was growing as the years went on. And even better than that, Kamiyada was finally able to make his dream a reality by moving in with a bunch of members of Midnight Society, doing shows in LA, and at this point it really felt like Midnight Society was going to break through into the mainstream. I mean, you have X already blowing up with Look at Me, you had 6ix9ine coming into the scene, City Morgue was starting to form up, and it felt like trap metal was finally finding its footing within the music industry, but Midnight Society never ended up really breaking through into the mainstream for one reason or another, but it's probably because they didn't want to sign a big industry deal and ruin the whole relationship they had going with each other, like Ski and X or Peep and Tracy, so they kept grinding in the underground, getting bigger and bigger, and dropping more albums. Kamiyada and Fuck It ended up dropping another diss track on X called Natural Selection, which was then uploaded onto Void Tracks, pushing the numbers even farther. He also got another track uploaded on the channel that was called Death Trap, which was off his album by the same name, and in 2019 he would drop another project called Live from Space Volume 2, as well as the entire Midnight Society going on tour in Japan and finally seeing just how big of a fan base they had in the country. And to this day, Kamiyada is a really big deal in European countries as well as Asia. It's pretty similar to a lot of other artists where they're huge overseas, but in America people still kind of consider them as underground. Little Soda Boy is one of the people that come to mind when I say that. In 2020, Kamiyada would get a couple tracks on Astari, as well as dropping a collaboration EP with 83 Hades, who is one of the artists that was really spearheading the new wave of trap metal coming out in 2020 and 2021. Kami would also drop a solo project called Death Trap 2, and then in 2021 he ended up dropping his next project called Metal and Me, and this is the only project during his entire career that wasn't dropped independently because he was actually signed to a little record company around the time called Hopeless Records, but he would only stick with them for one project, and after that he was once again an independent artist. And I really really feel like 2021 was the second win for trap metal, with big acts like Josiah, Killswitch, and Tokyo's Revenge blowing up, even though we all know what happened to him. And because of all this hype on the genre, Kamiyada was able to land interviews on Cult Classic, as well as getting noticed by a couple other people in the industry. It seems like Kamiyada was finally getting the respect that he deserved throughout his entire career, but he never really broke through into that mainstream level. I feel like after he worked with that record label, he probably realized he wanted complete creative control over his music. And like he said before, he never really wanted to be the biggest artist in the world. All he wanted to do was win alongside his friends, which seemed to be happening for the most part. I mean, him and Fuck It ended up falling out at one point, but they're making music together again now, so that seems to be okay. Black Sam would also end up leaving Midnight Society, but we don't really know the reason for any of this, so we don't know if it's actual fallouts or just them wanting to go in a different direction with their musical career. But either way, it's pretty impressive to see a rap collective stay together this long. I mean, Members Only basically doesn't even exist anymore. Spider Gang is all but broken up, so seeing Midnight Society be together in some format is definitely nice to see. For the next couple years, Kamiyada would keep dropping music, keeping his fans happy, but then out of nowhere in 2023, he ended up dropping a track known as Raw, which is a pretty interesting song for a couple of reasons. First of all, Kami would actually pay respects to X, and on top of that, he would also diss Haunted Mound, so it's kind of funny to see him squash beef with one person, but then start beef with a whole new collective. But after all, it is Haunted Mound, so it's probably not that big of a deal. Like I've said in other videos, I don't think there's any serious beef between Haunted Mound and anybody else in the rap game. I mean, most people just make fun of them, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe white boys do really shoot, and it's going to be a white boy summer where everybody's dying left and right. Who knows? But yeah, after all these years, Kamiyada was able to blow up once again on TikTok, doing numbers on SoundCloud, Spotify, and getting 500,000 views on the music video that he would post a couple months after the song came out, which somewhat proves that trap metal can be viable in the modern age. I mean, Darky also blew up recently with a couple tracks on TikTok, but for the most part, it seems like the entire genre definitely is hurting, so I'll be interested to see if Kamiyada is going to end up leaving that style behind or just keep doubling down with it. But no matter what he ends up doing in the future, I definitely got to give him respect for changing so much in the genre. He's kind of like Syringe, where nobody ever really talks about him besides a couple mentions here and there, so I hope this video can help to introduce a couple new people to his music and story. If you are a first time listener, definitely tell me in the comments. If not, and you've been listening to him for a long time, tell me what your favorite song is by him, because I definitely need to listen to a little bit more of him. And besides that, definitely let me know what member of Midnight Society I should cover next, or what artist I should do in general. I definitely think there's some emo rappers I could cover in the future if people are interested in that, but for now, I just want to say shout out to Knife Gang. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Trying to get to 20k and really break through into the world so we can get trap metal noticed once again. But if you already are and you've been watching for a while, I appreciate you being here. But besides that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Definitely big things coming. Got a lot of videos people want to see, so I got to get back to work.